So good afternoon, folks, and thank you for tuning in to another Risk Institute online conference series. Today, our conference is on mining and energy safety through remote sensing, otherwise named as MESS, and this is the day 2 of our conference series. We're really fortunate to have with us 2 exceptional researchers, Dr. Scammacca and Dr. Bellos. They've asked us to call them Vasilis and Ottone, who will talk to us about their work investigating mining safety, risks, and sustainability, as well as advances in dam break modeling. The presentations will be 40 minutes, with 20 minutes of Q&A, and we also have some time for open discussion at the end of both talks. Please could you make sure that your mics are muted, and if you like, leave any questions in the chat. But first things first, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the MESS conference series. So the purpose of this conference is to explore ways in which we can use remote sensing technology to make the mining and energy extraction safer, more resilient, and economically fair, using risk communication and analysis informed by remote sensing. We all know that mining and energy industries are vital to our modern way of life, but they also come with inherent risks. And remote sensing and GIS approaches, which includes technologies like satellite imagery, drones, and sensor networks, allow us to gather data around these risks in real time and make informed decisions about how to mitigate them. By using remote sensing, we can identify potential hazards, track changes in the environment, and communicate risks to the public and other stakeholders more effectively. And we can use this technology to support sustainable and responsible resource extraction and to ensure that the benefits of these industries are distributed fairly. So this conference is a really excellent opportunity for experts in remote sensing, mining, energy, dam safety, risk communication related fields to come together and share their knowledge and ideas on how we can use remote sensing to make the mining and energy industries safer and more sustainable for all. I'm sure we're all looking forward to an engaging series of talks and productive discussion of the next few events. So thank you. But before we begin, here are a few announcements. So on the 9th of February, 8:45 to 4 p.m, we'll have the MESS kind of day 3 event that'll be in person in Crush Hall in the School of Engineering. You can find more details about the event on our website. And then on the day 4, we actually have a symposium at the same location the day afterwards, running around the same sort of time. And that'll be a series of open roundtable discussions and panel discussions and networking events to bring people together and hopefully kind of make the most of the in-person event to kind of build collaborations in this research. So yeah, you'll find on the website our whole agenda for both events, the talks that we have planned, and the panel discussions and roundtable discussions and those that will be attending. We're still in the process of finalizing the agenda, but yeah, we'll let you know with updates. So our agenda today is starting off with Ottone's talk on geo-resources, risks, and sustainable land planning scenarios in mining regions, a framework tested on gold mining in French Guiana, followed by Q&A. So that'll be our first talk till 1 p.m. And then following that, we'll have dam break modeling, recent advances and future challenges by Vasilis. That'll be going on till 2 p.m. from 1 p.m. And then we'll have a little message from our sponsor, Huma. So Andreas will be giving us a short presentation for 5 minutes at 2 o'clock. And then if we still have some time, we have a few kind of leading questions and we can have an open discussion around some of these with the researchers and the experts in the room today. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Ottone Scammacca. He'll be, I've already mentioned the name of his talk, but he is a geographer and soil scientist working with soil ecosystem services, soil contamination, land reclamation, and land planning. After 2 years working with the French National Institute of Agricultural and Environmental Research, INRAE, as a researcher and assistant professor in soil sciences and soil ecosystem services, Dr. Scammacca is currently employed at the French Research Institute for Development, working on several projects concerning the characterization, assessment, and integration of pedological and geological resources within land management in French Guiana, as well as on the assessment and mapping of geo-ecosystem services and their perceptions by local stakeholders. So yeah, welcome, Ottone. Would you like to start sharing your slides and you can begin?
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Francis. Wait, okay. You can see it?
Yeah, we can. Perfect. Once you put it onto full screen, I think, then we know. Okay, great. We can see it.
It's okay?
It is. The floor is yours.
Okay.
Good luck.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, sorry, because my microphone is not working very well. Sometimes it's on and off. I mean, the earphone, sorry.
Sure, I'll let you know if
Okay.
there's any issue.
Thank you. But if you stop listening to me, don't hesitate, please. Okay, but thank you very much anyway, Francis, for the introduction and good morning to everyone. And thank you very much, first of all, to the Liverpool Risk Institute for having me here, in particular to you, Francis, but also Scott and Pedro and Tim, and to give me the opportunity to show my research activities. And thank you also, you all, for being here. As you said, so I don't need to present myself further, but as you said, I work, I'm currently employed as a postdoctoral fellow at the French Research Institute for Development, more precisely in the unit PRODIG, which focuses on the transdisciplinary organization and diffusion of geoinformation in different fields such as mining, but also agriculture, urban planning, but also geology, geomorphology, climatology. Just to precise you where I come from, my research background and current objects of study are quite transversal and gave me the opportunity to mobilize multiple disciplines, focusing mainly on the analysis of socio-ecological systems and the interactions between human societies and geo-ecosystems, but more in particular on the management of georesources for mining purposes and from a perspective of land planning and risk and impact assessment, such as in New Caledonia and in French Guiana, which is my main territory of interest, and always to support decision planning and policy making. Globally speaking, my research focuses on the integration of non-living resources, so abiotic resources, such as georesources with land planning. However, if most of such resources are often not well accounted for in land planning processes in several countries, it is important to underline that from a territorial point of view, international public policies and researchers as well tend sometimes to distinguish some territories from others according to the specificity, for instance, of the challenges they face at different speed and intensities, and with different cultural perception and historical backgrounds. Considering that, in my opinion, such distinction is political rather than historical, since anyway you can find some even if not all, some of these challenges in other territories. And therefore, I would just consider it not absolute. In any case, these relative diversities concern challenges related, first of all, to the availability of geodata, specialized data, and the transparency of information. Some countries, for instance, might be more vulnerable to the occupation of space by human society, leading to land use changes that can be more rapid than in other countries. Let's imagine, for example, with important demographic growth rates, but also the overexploitation of resources and georesources, which does not always have local outcomes, but also more social vulnerability to change, and in some cases, resilience of ecosystems to the land use changes, sorry. Also, some territories could host a great richness of cultural diversity, which is translated by a greatly heterogeneous range of perceptions to risk, according to the uses and benefits related to georesources as well. So globally speaking, in different territories, let's say, for example, in the Amazon area or in sub-Saharan Africa, or even in Southeastern Pacific territories, such areas can be even considered as a hotspots of geological and ecosystem and cultural richness that face specific challenges where georesource actually could play an important role. So from this context, my research tends to answer to two main general questions. First of all, how we can analyze the interactions between georesources and human societies. And secondly, how we can valorize and translate such interactions in terms of sustainable land planning to have strategies and scenario for supporting policymaking at the territory level. So the approach that follows such question is based mainly on two statements. The first one is strictly related to my PhD research. and states that mining should be considered as a land planning issue rather than a simple industrial object. So my PhD was based in the laboratory Georesources in France. Actually, I'm talking to you from Paris, and focused on the development of a tool to compare mining scenarios based on their level of risk. So considering mining as a land planning challenge means integrating the mining activity along with its human, technical and operational features, but also its risk, in a wider socio-ecological system, which is composed of biotic and abiotic factors, including human societies, and other uses that accumulate on the territory, for example, other mines of different natures and sites and techniques, but also the development of other projects such as urban or agriculture, for example. So this means to characterize as well the mining system, starting also from its temporal dimension, from the exploration, and a prospection phase until the period after the end of the mining activity. Indeed, current mandatory risk and impact assessment method and approaches applied to the mining sector are realized at the scale of the project often, and they often focus on one project at the same time. In other cases, for example, when you talk about portfolio risk management, this allows to assess multiple projects, but also with regard to the objectives only of the projects and not the general objectives of the territory in which the project takes place. For example, we would focus on shareholders instead of stakeholders, just to characterize. In other cases, such as life cycle assessment studies and approaches, you often focus rather on the larger system in which mining is performed, but sometimes the project, specifically mining project, rest and are considered as a black box, mainly because of the unavailability of some data. And so the mine is not, let's say, is not characterized in its technical and operational dimension. Therefore, the idea behind this approach is to develop a framework at the territory level that takes into account different mining projects of different natures and sizes, which coexist on the same area, which implies a different degree of risks. And to support, this is done to support policymaking and land planning strategies, which means also to being adapted to data availability and stakeholders' perception. Here, I will show you, for example, just an example of application of a prospective approach, which focused mainly on the risk related to the exploitation phase, but before the project would be planned. So in a perspective, let's say we have a prospective regard of the project. The approach, is tested on French Guiana, which is a French overseas territory located between northern Brazil and Suriname, in the main geoecological area of the Guiana Shield. And let's say that in this territory, gold mining played a key role in historical and current dynamics. For instance, being at the origin of mining villages, became now important human agglomerations in the territory. But also, gold plays an important role in land planning, particularly here, where demographic growth rate is extremely high. So demand of infrastructure can be extremely high as well, and where most of population is concentrated along the rivers and on the coastline, with more than 90% of the territory being covered by the Amazon rainforest and hosting important biodiversity hotspots. The approach proposed aims to create what we call territorial mining scenarios, which are alternative strategies at the territory scale, which are designed to meet specific predefined territorial objectives, which are defined among stakeholders at the territory level, so not only project-related stakeholders. And which is composed of a set of one or multiple mining projects in different numbers and or types, for example, which are distributed across an area. So the integration between the mining project within the territory system. So this means to characterize in detail the mining project in terms of technical and operational variability. So which techniques, which size, how much water the project needs, the mine needs, how much energy, how much fuel, how many people are working on site, etc., etc. and also characterizing the territory in terms of socio-ecological vulnerability. So once the TMS, so it's how we will call them, are developed, positive and negative risks are identified through different methods, for example, through reviews of documentation, interviews, collective meetings, and then risks are selected to develop risk scenarios. One, which is an accidental risk scenario. For example, let's say it concerns mining activity in extraordinary condition. Let's imagine the failure of tailing dams, for example. And an ordinary scenario, which are the risks that are absolutely necessary for mining to fulfill its main nature. So finally, the risk will be assessed based on specific indicators, and then they will be merged to the risk scores will be merged to obtain a final score for each TMS, so to allow their comparison and discussion among stakeholders. I will not go, of course, into details of the whole methodology that you can find available, but I will show you just some quick insights. All the assessment process, which is important to underline in any case, it's that from the development of the TMS to the discussion of the scenarios involved is based, let's say, on existing databases, technical reports, and field observation, and was done permanently and continuously with all the local stakeholders involved. So civil society, mining operators, and administration, for instance, but also research and academic institutes. As I said, one of the most important aspects of this approach is the development of the TMS. And indeed, this allowed us to highlight the great variability of gold mining projects present in French Guiana, but not only in French Guiana. And we managed to do this characterization according to different criteria. For instance, the mining permit, which can make you distinguish between legal or illegal gold mining, but also, for example, the targeted gold deposit, which can be primary, which is related to the original geological deposit, like you see here in red, or also, but also secondary gold deposits, which are mainly gold alluvial and alluvial deposits, as you see in yellow. But you can also, other criteria involved, for example, about different excavation techniques, surface mining versus underground mining, but also gold recovery techniques that can vary from gravimetric methods without any chemical substance, or to cyanidation techniques, or even mercury gold amalgamation. Let's say that such techniques imply a great range of recovery rate, costs, but also skills and related socio-environmental risks. For example, the mercury gold amalgamation is the most performant at this time, but at the same time it's also forbidden because it's also the highly risky, and it has been forbidden by the Minamata Convention, which concern mercury use in industrial processes. And that has been also forbidden in French Guiana since 2006. So the characterization of all gold mining projects in French Guiana allowed us to propose a typology of gold mining types, which is detailed in an article available online, but that globally allowed us to distinguish between illegal gold mining projects that use mercury and which target primary or secondary gold deposits, as you can see on the left. From legal gold mining projects, we can be artisanal, using only gravimetry, but also medium-scale projects, which can use gravimetry and or cyanidation. From large-scale projects, which mainly use exclusively cyanidation. Large-scale gold mining projects, of course. So such projects are detailed with a large database involving their technical, operational, financial, and societal specificities. For instance, we can see here the difference of dam height and structure between legal alluvial gold mining and medium-sized primary gold mining on the right. But the database can contain even information about the number of miners at site, operational costs, water and fuel needs and requirements, etc., and etc. So once the gold mining types are defined with their technical and operational specificities in a quantitative way, the project types are located on the study area, risks are identified to build the scenarios, and for instance, here we define 5 TMS, so 5 territorial mining scenarios that can satisfy one example general objective of 5,000 kilograms of gold annual production. Let's imagine. So as is shown by this example, for example, once the risks are identified, we will proceed to their assessment. So as I said, I will give you just a little example. In the case of the accidental risk scenario that we developed, which is dam failure by overtopping, the assessment of the risk was based on the combination of the identification of the impacted area using GIS-based tools, and the assessment of the overall vulnerability of the territory based on its socio-ecological components, like health, soil fertility, population density, the presence of public infrastructures, the quality of surface water, soil erosion, public drinking water, and so on. During the assessment, what also we did is to weight the risk according to stakeholders' perception, which allowed us to take into consideration the relative importance of each socio-ecological component by local stakeholders. And in such ways, we can obtain, so for each TMS, some risk score for the accidental scenarios and some risk score for the ordinary scenario, which are merged here just through a simple geometric mean, for instance, and that allows to obtain a global risk score. So this leads to compare, for example, different strategies which satisfy the same objective, but with a different overall risk level. For example, in this case, the one which has the higher the score, the less risk is the scenario. So in this case, for example, the scenario which is the most risky is the illegal one. In any case, as I said, you can find the whole of the entire framework applied to the example of French Guiana online on a public in an open access paper, if you might be interested. Also, what it is important to say is that this is just an example that is applied at the level of water catchment, but such approaches could be also adapted at different scales. For example, at the worldwide scale, like we are trying to do in a certain way with some colleagues from Australia, but also at the at the patch level, for example, like we are doing here, like you can see in the image below, at the scale of a small hydrological area, not the Maroni water catchment, but a small area within this water catchment, which is between Guyana and Suriname. This study in French Guiana is as well the object of a follow-up PhD student, which is focusing mainly on the illegal gold mining sector, which was less detailed in the first 3 years of the study. And without going into details, the new insights from this PhD allow to use the same typology tree to distinguish gold mining projects in French Guiana that we have developed before, but through an adaptation using new criteria for the illegal gold mining sector, which is more peculiar. This adapted approach is also based on statistical and stochastic modeling to quantify the characteristics of illegal projects, which are based on larger and confidential data sets that and also taking into account uncertainty, which was not done before in the past advancement of the projects. And other aspects that the student will be developing concern, for example, the relationship between mining impacts and sustainable development goals, the use of territorial objectives then go beyond the mere annual gold production like we did before, but also the development of a framework to automate virtually the approach on GIS-based tools to facilitate further uses. So globally speaking, we developed around this first statement an approach which was tested on gold mining in French Guiana. So the territorial mining scenarios are developed around territorial objectives that need to go beyond the interest of the mining operator alone, as we said, so going beyond the mere annual gold production. The approach is extremely data dependent and uncertainty should be more included. And also, other than assess two different risk scenarios, one should focus also on how, for instance, these risks might they be ordinary or accidental, are actually accepted by local stakeholders, and so how they could be reduced through safety barriers and technological development by mining operators. So mining should be considered rather a socio-technical phenomenon that cannot be apprehended only based on technical and operational data, and illegal gold mining is the perfect example of that, because it's highly variable and versatile, but it can nevertheless be quantified using statistical analysis, as will be shown soon, I hope, and always being aware of a latent social bias between such kind of activities. So, as I said earlier, my research focuses on two main statements. If the first one says that mining is a matter of land planning, and we saw that what can be developed based on such conceptualization, the second statement suggests that mining is just one of the different ways to valorize georesources for local development and land planning. Indeed, the term georesource does not only imply exploitation processes, and it could be regarded through the prism of the concept of geodiversity. When we say geodiversity, we intend the variability of soil, lithological, hydrological, geomorphological, mineralogical, paleontological features of a territory, and how such features contribute to socio-ecological functioning. So the concept of geodiversity is nevertheless often employed for conservation purposes and cultural functions. Let's think about for example, geoheritage or pedagogy or academic interests. But as said, land planning does not imply always exploitation nor always conservation. So geodiversity could play an important role in raw material supply, yes, for example, through mining, but also in regulating socio-ecological processes or supplying water or so on. For instance, such concept, if applied to the mining sector, let's imagine after the end of mining, this might enhance initiatives that aim to valorize old mining sites for recreational activities, concert halls or urban parks. You can see here the Dalala Theater in Sweden, but you can think also about the park in Paris. There is a park called Butte-Chaumont, which was one of the main parks in Paris and one of the biggest, and it was developed on an old quarry. So this second statement implies the integration of georesource through the prism of geodiversity within sustainable land planning, which means to translate geodiversity in terms of properties and processes to functions which can support the supply of provisioning, regulating, or cultural services that satisfy societal needs, use, and demand. And of such needs, mining is only one of them. Raw material supply is only one of them. And such needs and such societal needs and demands might be translated into land use and planning strategies that does not involve only the conservation, but also the transformation, the exploitation, the extraction, but even the artificialization or even the destruction of such resources, affecting so positively or negatively the resource and its functionality. So this approach is based on different axes of working axes and operational axes that cover all these processes and that aim to characterize geodiversity and its translation for land planning support purposes through scenarios of land planning scenarios. So we are currently finalizing the conceptualization of the framework, which will be public soon, and we started applying it to French Guiana. Again, the same reasons justify the interest of such applications in this territory because of the important role of georesources, which are currently mainly regarded for mining perspectives, but that can, on the contrary, let's say, be integrated in a wider view, a wider geodiversity-related view that make of georesource a challenge for land planning and a potential driver for local development in different fields, not only mining and quarrying, which limits georesources to only one functionality. Sorry. So what we did, first of all, in a collective work, it was to assess the geodiversity of French Guiana based on different indexes and methods which are currently existing. So we used different indexes like you see here on the left that we previously assessed based on the number of entities present in a systematic cell grid that we defined in French Guiana. And the aggregation of such indexes result in the first quantitative geodiversity assessment of French Guiana. Local moran and spatial correlation analysis were performed to identify high and low geodiversity clusters. For instance, what is shown here is that geodiversity is higher in such two areas, which are actually the areas of the greenstone belt geological formation, which is the formation where most of gold mineralization are located. But if you see at these results, you should just think that, first of all, the assessment is based only on the number of mapped entities, and that such areas have been the most prospected and the most detailed in terms of data, because there was a lot of gold mining to do. So it was also the target of a lot of studies. And also that these areas are the transition between different units between the coastline and the inner French Guiana, so which could bias the quantification process, let's say. So globally, this study showed us two main aspects. First of all, that a lot of geodata needs still to be collected in French Guiana, such as in other territories, and that the absence and the unavailability of geodata is a matter of land planning, is a challenge for land planning. And secondly, it confirmed us that there is the need to switch from geodiversity to the functional dimension of geodiversity that we call geofunctionality, and which is the object of this project. So we use, for example, 3 different proxies to quantify geofunctionality. 3 different proxies means that we use initial data such as querying and mining permits as an indicator. Also, SNIEF zones, SNIEF areas are important areas with high ecological value in Europe and in France. And finally, we used also, for example, points of geological interest and lithological outcrops as a 3rd proxy. So these 3 proxies helped us to quantify 3 different services that go beyond the simple mining interest. For example, we quantified raw material supply, so strictly related to mining and quarrying. We use ecological valued areas to quantify the role of geodiversity to support natural habitat regulation. And we used finally the points of geological interest to quantify the contribution of georesources to geotourism. So this is just a first and a test quantification, of course, but it allowed us to have some results. And then what we did, it was to subtract them to see the difference between the level of geodiversity and the level of geofunctionality. So as I said, this is only an example, but which can show you that georesources can be much beyond, far beyond the simple mining interest, and that such approaches could be very helpful for land planning purposes. Such study, it's also that available on open access journal, and so if you are interested, voila. And they will be following up in the next months. So globally speaking, I've talked a lot, even if I don't have voice anymore, sorry. I talked a lot and I showed you a lot of different things. So I know it is a lot, but I really hope that I've been as clear as possible. And so therefore, if I was not as clear as I hope to be, let's say that I would like to just give you a few messages to highlight what I'm trying to study, what I'm trying to demonstrate, which is the necessity of a holistic approach and holistic approaches to integrate georesources within land planning, to have the regard of a geographer and not only an engineer, not only a mining engineer even. So to look at the moon, let's say, and not at the finger. So to focus from the project side to the territory in which any project it's located, which can be a mining project, an urban project, an agricultural project as well. So that which is important to understand also, and I'm trying to underline, is that seeing georesources as a raw material suppliers only means to limit on one small part the role of that georesources can play in socio-ecological dynamics and in the satisfaction of human society needs and ecosystem functioning. And that geodiversity might be a new concept to overcome such approaches. So also that when it comes to land planning, that process, first of all, land planning does not mean only exploitation, as it doesn't mean even not only conservation or exploitation, but and that such processes should integrate stakeholders with their convergent and divergent perceptions towards a common effort of development. And that this development is not only economic, but way larger than that, and should be social, cultural, academic, environmental. That's when we speak about integrating geodiversity and georesources in sustainable development and in sustainable land planning approaches. So such projects need to focus on who is doing them, so who is mining, for example, but also the spatio-temporal dimension of the objectives of the project, and focusing on the convergence between the project objectives and the territorial and stakeholders' objectives. And finally, even before starting any development project, one may ask the question, why the project is needed for, which is the demand behind the project, which is the case of mining, and in particular of gold mining, if we focus on the data of the World Gold Council Forum, but can be applied to any projects that have an important footprint at the territory scale. So said that, Francis, I hope I've been good with the time, and I thank you all for listening. So if you have any questions or you're interested in some of the papers to have a bit more clues about this research, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I would be more happy than to share my research. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ottone, for a really wonderful, fascinating talk. It's nice to see you take such a holistic approach and connect so many different kind of facets together. So yeah, I'll open the floor for questions. Maybe I'll just get the ball rolling. One thing that came to mind for me, I think it was kind of on slide 18 when you were showing the high risk of the kind of illegal mining that was going on.
Yes, wait, there we go. Yeah, there is from 17 to 19. Nice, good job. I think I moved one slide at the last moment. Which was the slide, sorry?
It was slide 18.
Yeah.
There was also when you had the comparison of the different techniques for mining the gold. What intrigued me was just how much more efficient and superior the legal technique seemed to be in terms of appealing to people to mine gold in that area. Obviously, it's a lot more damaging to the environment, but I was wondering whether, maybe it's a naive question, I'm not an expert in kind of mining, but I'm wondering what could be done for the other techniques to make it more appealing and more efficient for miners, rather than focusing on making the really negative, the mercury technique illegal. How can you make the other techniques more attractive is my question, really, and whether that's possible.
But let's say that it is a very, thank you very much for the question, first of all. And it's actually a very actual questions, actually, because it is the object of many research studies which are all currently in progress. And specifically on gold mining, also because each commodity has its own way of recovery rate. For example, you won't apply the same techniques, the same recovery techniques to all commodities. So let's say that each commodity needs a discussion per se about the recovering technique which are needed. In the case of gold, traditionally gravimetry involves just the mechanistic separation of gold particles because of their density. Cyanidation is much more complicated. Mercury instead it was very accessible, and it still is That's why it's very used among illegal gold miners. And it's also the most efficient because, as you see, mercury amalgamation sanidation have a performance rate that is more than 90%, which is extremely high. Nowadays, in some countries, for example, in Western Africa, for example, and it has been reported that some illegal gold miners might have access to sanidation as well. So let's say that at the moment, some researchers are focusing on how to accompany illegal gold miners to switch from mercury amalgamation techniques to other techniques. The problem is that at the moment, sanidation and mercury amalgamation are the most performant. Some alternatives have been studied, and there are some reports about that, but they do not equal such two techniques which are currently used, and that is the reason of why they are currently used. And so what some researchers are trying to do as well is also to control in a certain way the use of mercury from illegal miners, because the use of mercury is one of the most important also risk related to illegal gold mining, because mercury is a heavy metal and it's highly volatile. You know, it can transform into methyl mercury, and it can accumulate through the trophic chain and contaminate living beings until also human and human beings as well, of course. So for example, in Venezuela, some researchers proposed, for instance, but it was just an example, to have common centers of mercury amalgamation, so that professional or researchers would accompany, or anyway, risk expert would accompany illegal gold miners collectively through the use of mercury amalgamation. You know, but it's still some testing options. You know, it's still a quite and very open question at the moment. You know.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Do you have any other questions from the audience? If there are, please just feel free to unmute yourselves and go ahead. And maybe whilst people are thinking, I have another question that I could ask as well. I'm just wondering, oh, sorry, Matthew has a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not a geologist at all, so this is probably a very basic question, but I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the measurement of geodiversity and how that relates to measurement of biodiversity.
Yes, thank you very much for this question as well. I'd say that the measurement of geodiversity, it was, first of all, the reason behind this project was also because it has never been done in French Guiana. And these kind of approaches are extremely engaged, let's say, if you may, I don't know if I can say that in English, but engaged on the territory, you know what I mean? And it focused only on our non-living data, let's say, in a certain way. But for example, soil is not integrated, but soil, because we miss a lot of information, of geoinformation about soil, which is a complementary project that I'm trying to carry on the side. So to redo again, re-quantify again geodiversity, including soil. Once we have a reliable geodiversity index, indeed, one of the objectives is also to understand the relationship between geodiversity index and biodiversity. For example, when I talked about functionality, it is well known already that geology is extremely important for the development of biomes. And a case in French Guiana is that most of the high ecological values or the protected areas which are present on the territory are located in specific areas which have a specific geology. Only that such specific geology is not let's say, it's not directly accounted for in land planning purposes, you know. And that's why, for example, when we were talking about geofunctionality, the proxy behind the service of regulating natural habitat is the natural areas, you know. So we are trying to go through the understanding of the relationship at least in French Guiana, the relationship between geodiversity and biodiversity through through this approach. But at the same time, there are a lot of studies that focus on geodiversity and its relationship with biodiversity. Last year in March, there has been a symposium that was focusing exactly on that, on how geodiversity and biodiversity are related and how we can exploit such knowledge for land planning, risk assessment, or even just heuristic purposes of understanding, you know. So I hope one day I will try to be a bit more quantitative, let's say, also in French Guiana. But at the moment we still got the motor running, let's say like that.
All right. Thank you, Matthew, for your question. And I don't know for your response. Another question I have is, because obviously there's so many different elements to this particular problem, and it looks very important, obviously. But if money was kind of no limit to you, and say, for example, you received $10 billion, where do you think would be best kind of to place that kind of money and effort towards kind of dealing with these challenges that you're experiencing, the risks that are the most prominent in this case? Yeah, how would you approach that in your opinion?
You mean if I would receive, for example, $10 billion to face,
sure.
but as a researcher or as a land planner?
As a land planner.
As a land planner. That is a really big questions, but this I would say that the needs of investment, I mean, the needs of investment would depend on each country and the challenges that each country faces, of course, because each country has its specificities and stuff like that. If I would focus on my territory of interest, if I would focus on French Guiana in particular, I would say that most of such investment should focus, I mean, a big part of such investment, which is huge anyway, yeah, but with the focus on the enhancement of academy and formation institutes, you know what I mean? Because one of the problems in this territory is also that you have a huge range of things to do, a lot of initiatives that are in process, but not a lot of means that are used to support such initiatives. And so this might allow as well to concentrate and to centralize competences on the territory, you know what I mean, on the long run. So I think that the priority number one would be skills, competence, and formation for the territory, within the territory, and on the long term. And then, of course, there will be a lot of projects that should be done with those money. But for such projects to be done, infrastructural projects or so on, there should be the necessary knowledge and of the territory and of its specificities. You know what I mean? I would never give $10 billion to do the best project in the world to a person who doesn't know exactly what are the challenges, because unfortunately, those money would be probably badly spent. You know what I mean? So I think before any engagement into engaging into the development process, the development of a specific projects, I think it is important to see that upstream, and so see, first of all, focus on knowledge development and enhancement in the territory, you know.
Yeah,
and forming people which are skillful and stuff like that, you know. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, no, it is a crazy amount of money, but I find it sometimes a useful thought exercise to kind of communicate where the biggest impact is. And I guess in many ways, obviously doing that would cost a lot less money than that, but kind of cultivating a higher level of skill amongst the people in that area with more nuance around that area, I think it definitely seems like a kind of worthy endeavor that can be done and achieved in, say, a 5 to 10 year window, no? But do we have any other questions from the audience then, before we move on to our next speaker? Okay, well, if not, thank you so much, Ottone, for your fantastic talk.
Thank you very much for having me here.